Okay, so I want to preface this a little bit. I want this to be really informal. I have a few slides here that just kind of talk about an overview of what I've been doing since summer and kind of what I have gotten done, and then some ideas of where I might go afterwards. And somewhere in there, I kind of want to talk about my NSF proposal, which I apologize, it was pointed out to me I did not actually specify. This is a GRF. So it's a graduate research fellowship proposal. I didn't specify that in the email, and my apologies about that. A couple other just quick things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the physics in this, but I kind of actually want to steer the conversation away from discussing the physics, which is fascinating, and I can give a whole other group meeting if you guys want to talk about that, but I really kind of want to talk about more logistical, the structure of what I'm doing and my research. So just a little bit of background. So I came into the reforms in E&M pretty much when they were done, actually. So there were years of work on creating the tutorials and that had gone into this by Steve and Stephanie and others when I came into it. And so there's currently a suite of 12 tutorials. The tutorial sessions are typically given as a one-credit optional course that is associated with the E&M 1 course. So that kind of changes the dynamic a little bit from what you see in 1110 and 1120 because it is optional. A little bit of a selection bias there. The tutorials are conceptually focused, but there's a little bit more mathematical manipulation in these than is typical for the Washington tutorials. That's largely a consequence of them being upper division. It's a lot harder to get away from the math at that level.
Okay. Do you mind if we interrupt along the way?
Do it.
Although we're also going to make this
short-ish. Yes.
So we offered one credit course as an option, partly because we couldn't require it of the students because they already have too many credits in the major. We're impacted for the major and the number of credits we can possibly require of students to be a physics major. I think that's Wall Street's fault. But does that impact, what happens when somebody does take the one credit? Does that prevent them from doing other things?
No, it doesn't count towards their graduation.
They don't know this.
It shows up on their transcript, but it doesn't count towards their graduation.
Okay, so very interesting. Sort of like extra credit. Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting to think. Why I was asking is because you're going to get. You said that it's optional on the one hand, but the one credit is to give them reward for it. But on the other hand, maybe they're not aware that they're not getting rewarded worth anything.
Well, it probably counts toward their overall graduation credit.
Yeah, it's a credit. Is my understanding.
Yeah, but you can't count it. It's not on the list of physics elective credits, and it's pass-fail, so it's not going to be allowed to be a physics elective because those have to be for a grade. And therefore, since the students have already gotten their full 45 credits of physics courses, it's on their transcript.
But it's one of the credits that you need for your 130 to graduate or whatever.
120 to
So
graduate. Yes.
Okay. It does count towards graduation.
If you are 119,
otherwise, I mean, it's like
if you can somehow be a physics major and be at 119 credits, then I think this.
So, what percentage of our students end up taking this? Any idea?
The current enrollment is 12 out of about 40 students in that class.
It's on the low end.
That's on the low end. I think in previous semesters you've gotten a little bit more like 50%.
And it's range from usually 25 to 50% of the class.
Does it tend to be the better students that enroll? Or the
Well,
poor
bimodal.
students, or
You get some of the better students and you get some of the ones that need a little more help.
so it's the ones in the middle that aren't?
Yeah, largely.
Has any work, gone into asking students, it sounds like we might have an answer here, but why they're doing this optional class? I'm interested to know their motivation for it. I mean, some might need help, some might because they're, double A plus personality.
Yeah, I don't know that we necessarily have the answer to that question. It would be
I'd just be interested to know what's your
Yeah,
population.
there have been surveys frequently given in the course that ask students about what helped them learn. So there's certainly some student feedback about the tutorials, but I don't think that we specifically asked them why they chose to come to the tutorials.
Cool.
Right. So there was also a bank of associated clicker questions, homework problems, and exam questions that were all created in association with this. They're all available online, usually presented to whichever lecturer happens to be running this class every year for them to pick and choose what they would like to use. And the other major thing that came out of the initial reforms was the open-ended conceptual assessment of the Colorado Upper Division Electrostatics Diagnostic, which is the CUD. The first thing that I did to get really involved in this project was get trained to grade this assessment, and you do actually have to be trained, but there is just a wealth of information sitting in spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets about student difficulties that can be investigated from the CUE, which not all of that has been tapped yet, although I'm not going to talk any more about that, but it's there. It's something that we're all really interested in looking at, but, time constraints and such. So for me specifically, some of the research questions that I'm interested in and the goals that I have. So the main one is, what are the major student difficulties? And are they conceptual or mathematical in nature, or is it this math-physics connection that is the major difficulty for students at this level? And are the tutorials effectively addressing those difficulties? And if they're not, what can we do to improve them so that they do effectively target these difficulties? And then the last one is this Washington model for tutorials and for curricular reform, is it really appropriate for the upper division level? In my opinion, this last one is kind of the most interesting of these three questions, although the one that I have the least information to address at this point. I'm also going to hold off on that one until a little bit later. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done to address those first two goals first. So, investigating student difficulties. The initial reforms took photocopies of student exam solutions from like 4 or 5 different semesters. And it's another really big data set of information that we can tap to get some feedback on what the student difficulties are. So one of the first things I did is just go through a bunch of exams and just code them for what are the difficult topics and where are the common errors with those particular topics. What, in doing a solution, where do most of the students fall off the path of getting to the right answer? So, for example, one of the first things that I looked at was Coulomb's law and Griffith's scriptar notation. Griffiths is the author of the standard textbook for this course. And this all boils down to pretty much difficulty continuous charge distributions. So, for example, this problem or a modification of this problem was given on the first exam for most semesters of this course. And it's basically you have a flat disk of charge with a continuous or with a uniform charge distribution on it, and they are asked to calculate the potential along an axis. So this is wildly overwhelming. I know I don't want to concentrate really on the specifics of what this is. This is one of the first things that I came up with. Essentially, this is a map of what the common difficulties were. So I broke this problem up into places where I saw most people have difficulties, namely with either just getting the right equation down on the paper was a significant difficulty. So to kind of break this down a little bit, 73 of the 74 exams that I looked at for this particular problem wrote down an equation of some kind. 20 of them wrote down the wrong equation. So that's basically what this is saying. So again, this was just a way for me to break things up, a way for me to look at what are the difficulties and where are they. Now, the advantage to that is it really helped me frame my thinking as far as, what are the problems, and where are the problems, but what it doesn't do is provide much insight into what the actual problem is. So, for example, one of the things that was on that bottom little section down there, I labeled that integration. Largely that comes down to people integrating over the wrong thing, using the wrong infinitesimal unit in their integration. Now, that could be a number of problems. It could either be that they know exactly what they're doing and that they know they're integrating over an area, but they don't know how to express an area. So, a mathematical difficulty, in other words. Or it could be that they don't understand that they're integrating over an area, that they don't understand that what they're doing is integrating over the charge distribution. And I would classify that as a physics problem. They don't understand conceptually what that integral means and what they're doing. But the answer to which of those problems that actually represents is really important to how we approach trying to address that problem, I would argue. So, thank you. So the next step for me was to do some think aloud interviews and just talk to some students. Let's actually see what the problems are. If they write down the wrong area element, why did they do that? And so that lets me probe some of the fundamental sources of these difficulties. And it lets me modify the tutorial to try and address that a little bit better. So I have done that now for 2 of the 12 tutorials I've looked into, I've done probably 10 interviews with students and made modifications to two of the tutorials. Both of those were actually implemented in the tutorial sessions this year, and we did audio and video recordings of both of those. And on top of that, myself and the other instructor who was in the tutorials with me, we both take detailed field notes after each of the tutorials, and all of those, they do a lot of things for us. They are one way of just assessing whether or not the modifications that I've made to tutorials are effective at all, and whether or not they're understandable. I mean, whether or not the students are really getting at what I'm trying to get them to get at. They also, interestingly, provide another avenue for identifying some other student difficulties. I've found that when I give the tutorials in the session, a lot of times difficulties will come up that I didn't see in the interviews and I didn't expect from the exam solutions. So it's just another way to kind of look at and probe what are the students thinking in this different environment. And then, of course, all of this will inform further revisions to the tutorials. This is kind of an iterative process. I will make changes again after I've implemented the tutorials and then implement them again the next semester and continue to refine. That's where I am right now. So that's kind of what I've done. That's what I'm planning to continue to do. So right now I kind of want to stop and pause and talk a little bit about my NSF proposal. For those of you who got a chance to read it, I want to open it up now and just see if you guys have thoughts. If there was anything that you guys saw in there that you brought and wanted to comment on. For those of you who did read it. For those of you who did not, I do have a couple copies here. If you're interested in glancing at it now.
Let's do that.
Sure. Yeah.
I only have like...
Hi there. Condensed physics is across the way. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean,
There's
the other
not
thing
enough there for
probably,
everybody, so...
What would probably be useful is if you walk us through it, or we could,
Okay.
sort of generally what you're pitching and framing.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of what the proposal goes over. There's an introduction section which is largely, well, I'll come back to the introduction section. The methodology section really goes over what I just went over with you. It just walks through what I have done, what I'm planning to do, and the structure of my research project in general. And then, let's see, what else do I do? So one of the things that was brought up when I originally drafted this was putting in that section in there with research questions. So I think my original framing of this had been a little bit more towards curriculum development. So I had really focused on reforming the tutorials and implementing the tutorials as developing curricular materials at the upper division level. So one of the suggestions was to frame that a little bit more to the research side and focus on student difficulties and investigating student difficulties and contributing to what is pretty much a non-existent body of literature on what the student difficulties at the upper division level are. And then, again, I go through the methodologies, which is basically what I just summarized for you there. And then at the end, I talk a little bit about just the anticipated results and intellectual merit and broader impacts.
Can you explain, I might be the only one who doesn't know this, but what's the funding mechanism and who's going to be reading these grants?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the graduate research fellowship proposal, whatever, something like that. And anyways, so the funding's coming from NSF. There are roughly 2,000, I believe, NSF proposals going to be granted this year-ish.
Receive about 12,000, fund about 2,000.
There we go.
And it's specifically in the area of educational research that you're applying?
Okay, so this is, maybe that's the perfect line into this. Where should I apply? So as of last year, they came up with the new category, which is the STEM education research category, which I would fit into science education if I applied there. Or there's physics. There's also interdisciplinary. Now, last year I applied as interdisciplinary. Now, even when you do that, you do have to pick a primary field, and I chose physics as the primary field. There's, unfortunately, because STEM is so new, there's actually very little information as to exactly where PER falls now. And so that was a little bit of just a guess on my part as to where I do belong. I didn't get a lot of feedback on my review sheets as to whether or not that was where I should have belonged. But one of the things to keep in mind is actually the way that NSF defines interdisciplinary research. So they define it as a mode of research by teams or individuals that integrates information, data, techniques, tools, perspectives, concepts, and or theories from two or more disciplines or bodies of specialized knowledge to advance the fundamental understanding or to solve problems whose solutions are beyond the scope of a single discipline or area of research practice.
Which can only be answered if they also define STEM education.
I was just saying, STEM education research seems like it has to fit into that. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's the nature of looking at one discipline, using another discipline's tools, and my gut says STEM education research.
Yeah.
But
and reading through your proposal, it's not clear to me that somebody reading it for the interdisciplinary, like council or whatever, would actually see this as interdisciplinary, because there's no reference to anything outside of physics or physics education.
Right.
So are you're making an argument for being in physics or being in STEM?
Not being interdisciplinary. That's my argument.
Is there a program officer or contact person?
I tried that last year.
Yeah.
Their response to that was that choosing the correct area is part of what you're being asked to do. So they were utterly and completely unwilling to give me advice.
What about like the number of awards?
Yeah, awards in each of those categories.
Right. So physics obviously has an overwhelmingly larger number of awards, but also an overwhelmingly larger number of applicants. But unfortunately, I do not know how to actually access the data on how many applicants were given, only the number of awards.
How many awards in STEM?
20-ish.
but it was new last year,
But it
so
was
I
new.
didn't. So it's they're figuring it out, and people don't know to apply to it necessarily.
But physics is probably like 100, right?
Yes.
Are there abstracts for the awarded or the folks that got awards that you could read and
So
see?
I hadn't looked at I looked at the physics titles, and there was I believe one honorable mention in physics that related to PER, but no awards in physics. The of the awarded STEM education ones, I actually contacted all of the people with the contact information on the that was released by NSF and asked for them to actually send me their proposals, many of whom did, and I found that very helpful in informing the way that I have written my proposal.
But I think there's only one in PER specifically. Maybe.
There were at least two. I know there was one from Washington and one from Maryland who were physics graduate students who got their proposals funded.
Through physics or through
STEM. Through STEM. But their emphasis was certainly not upper division.
Right, so here's the criticism, which is to say people in physics are more likely to be like, oh, yeah, junior E&A
is a canonical course. This is the thing that really matters. This is, and historically, actually, PER funding has been split between education and human resources and mathematics and physical sciences, and the physical directorate and the PHYS division within MPS has been one of the leaders in supporting. So StatMech, Quantum, and maybe even ClassMech has been funded from physics. That said, I think that'd be reason to consider going to the physics division.
So in astronomy or astrophysics, there's a real difference in the way they operate on the small EHR contingent versus the quote regular research. The regular research seems to have their emphasis on treating everybody the same, which is to say they give you no information beforehand. Whereas on the EHR side, they gave a lot more information about what they'd like to see. So I was really surprised that you got such lousy information from program officers, but I wouldn't necessarily give up. My suspicion would be that because it was so new last year, that the program officers didn't really know themselves. Seriously. And I would certainly try them again.
Okay. Yeah.
So, because of the size of the GRFP, the program officers farm a lot of it out. They have a GRFP help center that's you can find on the website. So, the nice thing is you talk to somebody, but the bad side is you're not talking to the program officers. It's a lot harder to get a hold of them than other program officers, in my experience.
But by and large, I mean, I think there is strong suggestion here. I was playing devil's advocate. I didn't want to overemphasize that. I think STEM is probably the right way to go.
Yeah, so, I mean, this has kind of been something I've been thinking about a lot, largely because the reviews that I got back were interesting, especially because now I've actually seen reviews from several other people, both people who got the fellowship and those that did not. And there were a lot of reviews from people who did not get them, who got similar ratings that I did, and got very specific feedback as to what they did wrong. Whereas the feedback that I got was somewhat contradictory and not specific.
That's usually the case. Do you know something about the mechanics of the review process? Is it panels or
it's
individuals?
Panels. Yes.
Yeah. But
it's a little different. Yeah. So
right.
first you have two individuals who will look and basically say, should this go to
okay, and then go to a panel.
Because it's such a large program.
Yeah.
Because panel reviews tend to produce a certain amount of convergence. I mean, people come in with very different ratings, and then they tend to converge.
Which actually,
but then you don't get. But when you have just individuals, that's when you get reviews that are like 100% opposed to each other, and like, what on earth do I do right?
Well, and I think, so what I did last semester, when you choose interdisciplinary, you actually have the option of choosing a percentage. So they actually ask you to rate how much in each of your fields, each of the two fields. You still have to pick a primary, which, as I said, I picked physics. But I actually rated them as being like 50-50, STEM and physics. And so I kind of suspect that what happened was I got rated by one person from physics and one person from STEM. Sorry. One of the two reviewers made actually no criticism. There was not actually a single statement of like, you didn't do this well or you should have done this better. The other gave a couple of criticisms about broader impacts, and specifically addressing broader impacts, which is something that I've made a pretty significant point of trying to do a better job of in this version. My own feeling is STEM. But then the question becomes, well, STEM or interdisciplinary, which I think I'm also feeling STEM.
I'm going to kind of agree with Danny and say, if I was reading this, I would want to be seeing, like, what two departments are you working with? Yeah. Like, and what...
If you go interdisciplinary.
If you go interdisciplinary, and like who's your contact here, and what is your background? You take, like in both these things, and that is that's not part of it. I would say compared to other interdisciplinary proposals where you see like a lot of support from these two different aspects coming together. Here it's just like I have this one sort of avenue in.
Well, in that sense, if we're worried about departmental connections, I'm not associated with the School of Education at all.
Well, right. I mean, I think if you were going to submit it to interdisciplinary, maybe it should be rewritten to talk more about connections the PER group has to education and into something like that, and to really emphasize that kind of partnership within the university that you are working in. But right now, it seems to me more like a STEM proposal.
Okay. Oh. Although, again, I mean, if we're talking going in STEM, again, I have no connection with the education school. It's run out of physics.
But that.
That's okay.
No, I totally see what you're saying about the interdisciplinary.
Proposal if it's interdisciplinary.
Say that again?
It might get read as an education proposal if you submit to interdisciplinary.
Right.
As opposed to not getting read as an education proposal if I put it in STEM.
No. I'm just saying, like, I mean, because you're rating, you're saying you're going to put it in STEM, you're going to put it in physics, and so you're getting two very different people, like you said, looking at it, and it reads differently.
Seems like it might be a little bit easier to make the case for the uniqueness and importance of this in STEM, because pretty much everybody in STEM knows that the so much more of the work has been done at the introductory level.
Right.
So this immediately would be recognizable to everybody in STEM as, yeah, okay, so you want to do upper division. Whereas if you're interdisciplinary, there's such different interdisciplinary things. You know, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges.
And I can't imagine it not being harder in interdisciplinary now that I think about it. You've got to serve two different masters, and all you need is one to be pissed off at you to get a good whipping. Bad metaphor. But, which is maybe what happened last time. You know? So, yeah, it strikes me as hard. In terms of going back to the proposal itself, just like big picture stuff, I mean, one thing to think about from this group is like, what really are the big, punchy new things? So, upper division, big, punchy, new. In some sense, we'll chat a little bit more detail about this. I think you have to make the case for why upper division a little bit more. It's entirely likely, especially if it were going to physicists, but I can even imagine in the STEM community, people are like, well, those are students who already know how to learn, or they're already, physics majors, they're already self-selected, so don't do this baby stuff. Not that the STEM community would call it that so much, but this kind of approach may be less effective. And I think that's actually a researchable question, something that you could pitch.
Right. And that is actually something that I've pitched a little bit in my personal statement, but it may definitely be.
I think one sentence would be just fine to answer why you're going into this. The other thing is I really like this a lot. The other thing I could imagine doing is I would punch up the new stuff about what you're doing. And so there are two ways of doing that. One is to say, this is really first time in the canonical course that people are focusing on this and really want to emphasize that. The other thing, especially for a GRF, and then the other thing is I would de-emphasize, I love your prior work that's included in here, demonstrates your capacity to do that. I would de-emphasize the preliminary, or just continually list it as preliminary work, because it could easily be read as saying, oh, I'm just going to go and continue working on the 12 tutorials that are already done and just keep doing somebody else's project, as opposed to saying, wait a sec, there was some preliminary work that was done, but it wasn't based on any understanding of student difficulties, wasn't based on, there was no prior literature on that, wasn't really done based on student interviews, so it's a good base to work on, but you're going to apply the education and research underpinning to this curricular design. And so there's preliminary work, shows positive work, but doesn't follow any of the research protocols. You're going to go do the research on it, punches this up in a way, and turn these into, from curricula to research-based curricula.
One other question I had, Bethany. So just going back to like where you should send this, have you looked at the people locally that have experience with this? There's something on their website about local folks with experience either evaluating or winning one of these graduate research fellowships.
So I have there's a workshop, sort of a one-day little hour and a half little thing that I think the graduate school runs every year, which I've attended 3 years in a row.
Okay.
So I've gotten that.
Okay. There's a listing of I guess five people here at University of Colorado with some experience that they list their emails and stuff too. And they've volunteered to talk with people and be mentors.
Yep.
We also have one person in this group who's not here today, but May got one.
I looked at her proposal in depth last semester, and have referred to it again this semester.
When you look at other people's proposals, have you been looking at their personal statements too?
Those that sent them to me. I didn't actually directly ask that of them, although a couple of them I sent it anyways.
Because my understanding of this GRF mechanism is that it's partly based on the project and also a large part is based on the personal statement. And I've seen candidates who have almost exactly the same projects get very different scores, and it seems like they're always very interested in funding interesting people and people who are doing things that are relevant to the mission of NSF. So anything you can do to make your personal statement more that way seems to help. I mean, I knew a guy who wanted to be an astronaut, and so the first paragraph of his personal statement was he did a countdown, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blast off, and we're just going like, this is awful. But he got a GRF, so
Well, I mean, the other thing is people are reading 1,000 of these, right?
Right.
That's going to be one that stands out. Better word.
Yeah, I didn't get any feedback on my personal statement or any of my history stuff. It was only on my proposed work. It's the only feedback I got.
But that doesn't mean that it may
right.
still have been a determining factor.
In fact, this is sort of out of your hands. I think a lot of your proposal will depend on your letters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for feedback on the proposal. Wish me luck.
Good luck.
Okay, so kind of back to just my general work now. I'm sensitive to time, so I'm not going to take more than 15 or so minutes here, but hopefully I can ask you some somewhat provocative questions. So here's some things that have kind of been bouncing around in my head, things that I've been thinking about, things I've chatted with Steve about. So I'm going to come back to this last of the research questions that I put up there in the beginning. So is the UW model for curricular reform appropriate at the upper division level? And I ask this question because I claim that upper division is different. The learning goals are different at this level. A large part of that is that there's a lot more emphasis on the mathematical sophistication. And it's, as I said before, it's a lot harder to avoid that now. It's much more an explicit part of the learning goals. The focus is a little less conceptual, for better or for worse. And the students are different, very different. This is an entirely new population, well, not new, but selected out population of students. They have a lot of background with physics formalism. They're juniors now. They're starting to identify themselves as physicists. And that may very well come with very different epistemologies about physics and about learning. And those are things that may very much change the way that they interact with any curricular reforms. And kind of along with this, there's this question about theoretical perspectives. I'm sure some of this is largely coming from being in Noah's class this semester, which is talking a lot about theoretical perspectives. So what kind of theoretical framework is most useful at the upper division level? And perhaps another poignant question is, what is our current theoretical framework? And I don't know personally whether I can answer that question, except for to say that I don't think we're misconceptions. So I don't think that the tutorials are really following this elicit, confront, resolve strategy. They do it maybe to a small point, but certainly not to the point that the Washington tutorials do. And I don't know, is this an important question to answer?
So, what is the theoretical framework behind the Washington tutorials? Is it explicit in published papers?
Once upon a time, they said there was none.
Paula Heron got up at a PER plenary session and said we don't follow a theoretical framework. She was either lying or ignorant.
Yeah. Well, she might not have known. They might not have designed it with one in mind.
Since we're being on tape, let me defend that a little bit. She then went on to say that they didn't need one, that they were taking more of an engineering approach to what was going on. I mean, I think then the subsequent discussion and it was then dubbed the no theory theories by Andy at Black Hill State, out of San Diego State. Really great analysis of that. But just because you say that you don't have a theory doesn't mean that you don't operate from some sort of methodological framework.
I mean, there is no such thing as pure empiricism.
Right.
It's just that you simply haven't confronted what your theory is.
Right.
It's just all implicit.
Right.
I also think, to say what is, our theoretical framework for designing this class, you don't have to share theoretical framework with anyone else who's working on it. You can work towards the same goals and hold two different theoretical frameworks. So I think something you might have to answer for yourself rather than say, what is the group's, you don't have to agree with them.
Well, if we're going here, if we're spending 1 second saying, why have a theory, right? Yep. What does theory buy you on that? Why is it that everybody has one, whether they know it or not? The answer is it gives you a framework for understanding how to make sense of things and to coordinate disparate information that comes together. It provides a tool set for you to sort of coordinate. Another is, to be glib about this, is to say it moves from engineering into science. To be really mean and mischaracterize my engineering colleagues, that you move from the idea of sort of pure empiricism and knob turning to see what the results are into some sort of informed and predictive model that you can then engage in. It also comes with all kinds of implicit biases along the way, so it tells you not to look at things or to interpret the data immediately in particular ways. So I see it as both very important for you if you want to move around and, beyond local maxima of whatever it is that you're looking for to sort of more global systems, but it also then prevents you from seeing things, and you have to understand the biases that come along with that. Which is why I would say it's important.
It's like if you're applying in the STEM category, I think it's going to be more important than if you're applying in the physics one. I think education folks are going to be more attuned to theoretical frameworks than your average physics person.
We have no theoretical framework. We'll not get you anywhere with it. No one will get you somewhere with an education community.
Yeah.
Well, the tutorials...
We don't have to review... We don't have to send this one out.
The tutorials are, and there are papers about this, are very broadly based on the idea of constructivism.
Right.
At the very least.
Yes.
Yeah, Piagetian constructivism.
Yeah. But beyond that, I mean, other people have characterized the assumptions that they're making about student knowledge that goes into developing their tutorials, even if they don't acknowledge it. And it's things like students have large-scale misconceptions that need to be, and the way to get rid of them is to elicit them, have the students confront them, and then resolve. I mean, it's written right there. That's the theory frameworks. But it all starts with a particular ontology of student knowledge, which is this, as characterized by Alvin Hammer, as a unitary. So if you believe in that, then elicit, confirm, resolve is one method.
Well, one of the, I guess personally, one of the objections that I kind of have to the elicit, confront, resolve idea at the upper division level is, my feeling is that students have less concrete ideas about the material covered at the upper division level. So I guess there's, even if you wanted to go with this framework, I feel like there's a lot less to get your fingers into, to get a hold of, and to work with.
Do you mind if I sort of retort to that a little bit?
Absolutely.
Which is that I think you're right that students may have less robust conceptual framework about what, beyond Maxwell's equations. But I bet they have a fairly robust conceptual framework about the nature of learning by this point, as well as the span of the role of different tool uses in learning. So, for instance, in order to make a claim, what counts as real physics is mathematical rigor, is my suspicion, and that's that the key tool in framing is mathematics. So, for instance, there may be some resistance to conceptual framing at the upper division level, or maybe even a variety of representational framings where you're focusing on different representational structures. Or it just came up in our class in the discussion boards for today. How would you even make a connection to the real world in upper division? Which I think is a great question. Suggests also what a disservice we've done to the students who've come through this and can't answer that question about classes that, so you're making, all of these are huge strides that are shifting, but students have fairly robust ideas about what junior E&M is, if not the conceptual components that go within it, the content components.
I would push back that all of our students know Maxwell's equations as a robust concept, but some might, but I don't know that...
Could you defend, actually, that they know that they know that it should be? Do they know what Maxwell's equations are?
I don't know that they've connected, so to go...
They know the math.
They have this academic knowledge. I don't know if they've fully connected that with their experiential knowledge to create a robust concept.
Yes, and they don't have academic knowledge of it, though. They might have some very coarse procedural. I'm going to defer to the people who are studying this, but I can't fathom that students really are able to, deeply, even if you were just to go from the differential form to the integral form, for students to be able to explain why that matters or how that happens.
And there is a vast conceptual difference between ordinary differential equations and partial differential equations. You ask completely different sets of questions about them. They look sort of similar because of the notation, but it took me a long time. I think it was probably only in the Jackson E&M course that I took that I really started to appreciate that the PDE itself contained relatively little of the information I needed to solve the problem. Everything was in the boundary conditions.
And, the rest of it is just math.
Yeah, but I mean that came pretty late.
No,
and so
I agree with you. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of students, I'm guessing that a lot of physics majors, they know Maxwell's equations. They have them on their T-shirts and all of that.
Sure.
But in terms of what do you use them for?
Exactly. That's why I said they're not robust concepts yet. Because they don't have those connections.
Yeah, and it may be beyond possibility to achieve them in junior. That may not come until Jackson.
I agree.
Well, so to go back, if you took this is among other things. This says very strongly, well, you shouldn't take this idea of a conceptions view because even if you did, and you could defend it, if you did, you'd be setting the bar too high for yourself in order to have achievement in the class, right? Which is, I don't know that you want to have students to really develop a coherent, unitary view of Maxwell's equations. I think that'd be great. It'd really be nice to see, but I'd love to live on that world. But I don't think that happens, at least for the bulk of students in the classes. Again, I'd be happy to be corrected on that.
Well, just to make a somewhat tangential distinction is that, as I read it, the unitary versus manifold view is not you have a manifold and then you go to unitary. It's that the nature of knowledge is inherently manifold.
I think that there's debate within the community about that.
There is. But I guess what I'm saying is that it may not be the ideal to have a unitary conception of Maxwell's equation because that might not exist. But
that's because you believe in democracy, Noah.
So
I don't understand. But
talking more concretely about your proposal.
Inclusive of ideas.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I think the theoretical framework is a useful thing. It's really tough here because you have 2 pages. So if you really want to say, here's what I think's happened, you could spend 2 pages on just that very easily. But so I would hopefully you can make
I draw
a short
from X
statement.
and Y, X reference and Y reference, and apply that with the mixed quantitative qualitative methodology at another reference, right? So now you've added 3 references. I'll take some other ones out for you.
References also take up space, but the other thing is it depends on who reviews. I think some people will appreciate it and some people won't care. So
if you submit it to STEM, I think you need to use after years of submitting different articles and stuff, you need to use the word theoretical framework is, and then write something, even if it's complete BS, that they want to see it and they're not going to find it unless you have it. Somebody said that earlier. They have the expectation that you've articulated it. In physics, they could care less.
Right.
They don't even know that there is such a thing. But I think if you put it in STEM, you need to actually explicitly state it.
Yep.
I think whether or not you go deeper into the theoretical perspective, I think you should just definitely say more about the question about is the tutorial method, the most effective kind of transformed version. Because that's not just relevant to E&M. You can say that it's relevant to this suite of other courses that actually is what undergraduate physics majors spend the bulk of their time doing. So it's got broader application there. And then you kind of only highlight the point about the mathematical manipulation potentially being a distinction. But maybe even just if you just did some brainstorming and maybe what does real world connection look like? In these really heavy theory classes and things like that. Where there just seem to be other big differences between what's typical at intro and typical at upper division. I would just expand on that a little bit.
One of the things that I'm sort of still thinking about is I think it's phrased in a better way in the document than here. Here you asked if the PEG model was what was your wording? Is it appropriate? And here you ask if it's effective. Those are different questions.
Yeah.
But both of those beg the question of effective or appropriate for what goal? And that gets back to this question of is the conceptual difficulty the underlying issue at the upper division? What is our goal? Our department explicated some learning goals, but that wasn't really framed by anything other than a working group of physicists, not PER physicists, who thought about learning goals, and then the tutorials ended up, I think, being designed to try to help students problem solve on traditional end of chapter Griffith's problems. So I don't know if it's worth thinking about what do we mean by is it effective for upper division courses? Effective to what end? I'm still struggling with what is the end that we are trying to achieve. If we're going to, even if we don't have a theoretical perspective, that is to say, if we want to engineer better performance on what?
I was going to point out that another reason not to use the UW framework is that it basically has a singular goal, which is conceptual change of explicit content. And it doesn't have any other goals about epistemology or attitudes or identity or anything like that.
Oh, I so disagree. It's all deeply ingrained in the social structure of the tutorials and
it's not their goals.
Explicit goals, right?
Explicit.
That's not their explicit goal, but I would argue that in fact they are there when you talk. When Lillian talks, she has all sorts of other ideas rather than simple, hammering of student conceptual ideas.
Okay. It doesn't.
It's not published.
It's not published. She might have that in her mind, and she might talk about that in class. But it's not published, and it's definitely not an explicit part of the tutorials.
Or what's taken up in the gestalt of what our tutorial is about, right? When we defend why do we implement tutorials.
And even if she thinks that she's doing that, it's pretty clear from the research that's out there that it doesn't achieve it.
It achieves some of it. It doesn't achieve some of the hidden curriculum. It achieves others. It does develop social. So anyway, I'm sensitive because Emily's going to give a presentation in a minute. So a few last comments here or questions?
I'm good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.